ANP. I see we have quorum, and I call this meeting to order. First issue before us, moved by Councilor Ribbiak, seconded by Mayor Augustine, that the agenda for the December 17, 2012 regular meeting of Policy and Priorities Committee be adopted. Any questions, comments, additions? Seeing none, I call the question. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Councilor King?
Yes, I do have one with respect to item 5.1, the permissive grant application. I would like to be excused from that discussion as I chair the Community Policing Committee, and they have an application in.
Thank you, Councilor King. Any others? Seeing none, duly noted, we have one. The first order of business before us, moved by Councilor Kersey, seconded by Councilor Papp. Yes, Catherine, this is the 5.1. Moved by Councilor Kersey, seconded by Councilor Papp, that the issue sheet for agenda item 5.1, permissive grant evaluation results and recommendations be received, and that the recommendation contained therein be approved as follows. That Policy and Priorities Committee recommend to Council that the following permissive grant allocations be considered as part of the 2013 operating budget. Listed as Pelham Art Festival, $2,500. Pelham Care, $17,600. Child Advocacy Center, $1,500. Women's Place, $4,000, for a total of $25,600. Questions or comments? Councilor Papp.
Notwithstanding the effort and work that went into this, I would really like to defer this and to get further information on the details of these applications. I'm really, quite honestly, Mr. Chair, not comfortable with the recommendations, and particularly with a couple of them. And I would want to get a little bit more detail on the impact that these groups have on our local municipality.
The permissive grant evaluation criteria, were you able to see that?
I saw it, and I'm not happy, Mr. Chair. I have to be very honest with you. I think it was too subjective. Again, we're right back to where we were before. Notwithstanding maybe two of them, the rest of them, I'm just at a loss. But, I mean, I leave it to my colleagues. If they're happy with the results, then so be it.
Okay, now, did you want to make that deferral a motion, or did you want to
Well,
just discuss
I guess
this,
through a matter of
this first of all?
Well, I need some more information about those that were turned down, and you know, when it talks about majority and you know, who they didn't impact, I don't see any data that states what majority was not a majority. I really am not comfortable with the. I realize we changed a little bit, but again, it seems a little bit without prejudice, a little bit subjective, and I'm very. Maybe some of that can be alleviated by giving me more information and giving myself, from my own point of view, of the impact of these grants when it discusses and how it affects our local citizens. So, however, I could be the minority, and if that's the case, I'll live with the.
Mr. CAO, is there a comment that you would like to make? You were involved with the evaluation, you and the treasurer, like either of you would like to.
If there's specific, Mr. Chairman, if there's specific questions from any councillor about the decision-making rationale, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay. Councilor Papp, would you want to bring that forward here? Or?
Well, I want to know about the impact, particularly of those that were turned down, where it talks about the scoring and evaluation. Some of it doesn't indicate what the data, like how many clients were affected. It doesn't really specifically state that whatsoever. Unless you have more information than I do. But that was the whole idea.
I think, yeah.
But, I mean, if it's considered to be, and notwithstanding that, I will be bringing something separately next meeting about a particular request. But none of these I'm saying are that they aren't deserving, but there are some that particularly, I'll give one for example, the Pelham Museum. I mean, I don't know, how much more do we have to say? I'm just at a loss. I'm just, so maybe the rationalization that you came up with is in order, and I'll live with it, but I can tell you that over the course of the next fiscal year, we need to really take another close look at these permissive grants.
So your concerns are at assessment criteria.
Mainly at assessment criteria and that, and I'm, some of the organizations that are here receive provincial funding. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, I'll stand corrected. I just would like a little bit more.
Okay, we'll let this discussion go a little further. First, I'll call on Councillor Kersey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have to agree with my colleague. I guess my expectations, and while I do appreciate the work that staff did, and they were privy to the information, I think my expectation was that we would have seen a summary of the application, such as number of families impacted. So let's take Pelham Cares, for example, what their total operating budget was, what their financial situation was, how many families were impacted by their services, that type of thing, so that we can in fact see that money that we're giving there is in fact being utilized within the town of Pelham. Are we funding, and I'm not saying this is the case, but I'm using it as an example, are we funding an organization that collects lots of food, and then if it can't be distributed in Pelham, it ends up in other municipalities? Women's Place, are they provincially funded? Do they have money in the bank? How many people from the town of Pelham, women from the town of Pelham are benefiting from the services of Women's Place? So that's the sort of summary that I was hoping that we would see together with the evaluation process, so that, and the grading sheet, so that in fact we could assess it from a data standpoint. I realize that it creates an additional burden on staff with respect to summarization of the application, but I guess in my mind that was what I was hoping to see as well when we would have had this report brought forward. It would have provided greater clarity and confidence in the fact that we are making an informed decision.
To staff, if in fact a deferral was here, could some of this information be brought forward and discussed at the next meeting of PNP, or is that beyond the time frame of what we can do or what we can't do? I'll defer to the treasurer.
From the applications, we can pull out the information on the number of residents in Pelham. Some of it's very difficult to discern within the application. Some of it is not provided to us. However, for instance, in the Pelham Cares, they'll talk about how many receive funding for food, but they also talk about the majority of them that receive transports to hospitals and so forth in this area. So you get a greater feel for how many residents in Pelham are being affected by the funding for Pelham Cares. Some for instance, the Welland Historical Museum, the number of Pelham residents was significantly low compared to the rest of the whole of Niagara region, which would cause us to put an evaluation on the majority of users in Pelham at a lower level. So there is some of that information there. Some of the applicants didn't provide details of specific Pelhams, but what they forecasted for the future, well, we don't know what the impact is currently, and how they are impacting the residents and then impacting other services that are provided as well. But we definitely, this is done according to the procedure and the policy that was just previously approved a few months back by council. So we brought the evaluation sheets, that's what we were asked to bring forward. But definitely we could go back and gather information from each of the grant applications and bring that forward too. I mean, some of them provide volumes of information that you'd have to go through.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am pleased with the information that we do have. I think many of us are familiar with these organizations. The town has funded some of these through a permissive grant program before. Some of them we've heard presentations here at council. Some of them, the work is well known. So at least to me, and I'm only speaking on behalf of myself, Mr. Chair, So I'm very pleased. There's additional information in the report and the scoring, which was requested by committee. So I am pleased in supporting this. I would like to highlight one thing, Mr. Chair, and that is regarding the Child Advocacy Center. And those that were on council before will recall that council did fund the Child Advocacy Center actually above and beyond the permissive grant a number of years ago. I think it was a 4-year grant of the same amount that's been requested here. And they requested a meeting with me. I met with them recently. They indicated that they were going to be putting this permissive grant in, but they are very, very appreciative of the previous support that was given, and so I just wanted to relay that to members of council. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Other questions or comments? Councilor Ribiak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to support this as well, even though, perhaps like my colleagues, I am not entirely happy with the outcome. It seems to me, though, that the number of applicants for permissive grants will always exceed the resources that are available, and all of them, probably all of them, are deserving. And I would think that staff has had a difficult time picking through and determining which we ought to honor. They did set up a grid. They did provide a scoring. I freely admit that some of these that succeeded, perhaps I would have relegated to a further place. But I'm certainly willing to accept that any process is going to produce some level of that kind of discomfort, and to choose one level of discomfort over another, I guess, is not what I want to do. I think it was a tough job. The job was done well. I'm not sure that we could end up with 100% satisfaction, because something's not going to make the list, and they're all deserving. So tough job, but I think it was done well, and I'd like to see it succeed.
Other questions or comments? Again, the criteria, as was asked, is generally highlighted. The specific facts may be missing, but staff did have the information from which to discern the score sheet. And in fact, I have to agree with comments that were made, that it is certainly a lot more information than we did have in the past. And if we're saying it's still deficient, then certainly it's the wish of this committee, if you wanted to send it back till the next meeting. Mr. CAO, would there be a problem waiting till next PMP? Or that's adding another month now? Is this, or through you to the treasurer perhaps, is there a time frame that needs to be followed?
Well, this is part of the budget process, so the impact, if the dollar amount stays the same, we could bring it forward for consideration at budget, but there would be a definite impact if it would hold up the budget process, not having the final number until that time.
Councilor Pat?
Mr. Chair, in the interest of pursuing this further, I would basically withdraw the deferral and actually ask that, that the scrutinization and the impact statement of these permissive grants be part of a consideration for next year. I do not want to, hold it back. I do understand these. I just think that there's some maybe additional work, additional ways of analyzing and evaluating it. So on that note, I'll withdraw.
And perhaps some initial notes in the reporting of it. Is this where you're going to?
Yes, I'm not, again, I'm not one that usually is very critical of these. I'm just concerned about, the permissive grants. I mean, and giving latitude and the value for them is very important. So I'll withdraw that, and hopefully next year, as we work through, again, the system, that we can maybe, that information could be included. So on that note.
Councilor Kersey, a comment?
Yeah, again, I would support my colleague and would be willing to support the permissive grants as put forward for this year. Perhaps it becomes an issue at the Priorities and Policies Committee for further discussion to perhaps amend that policy. this is a learning curve. It's something we've changed and we've massaged, and maybe we can massage a little bit more such that we could add just a summary statement of the applicant for further information of council so that we can understand how you've arrived at your evaluation sheet. I think it would just provide greater clarity and greater transparency to the public as well.
Coming up on the agenda is another matter which will deal with an overall look at things that we are going to be doing. So perhaps we can add that at that particular point in time to keep it on the P&P agenda.
Fine.
And we'll deal
That's
with
fine.
this specific issue right now. And
That's
if there-
fine, Mr.
Okay.
That's fine.
Treasurer wants.
That's fine.
Madam Treasurer?
Yeah, I would just like to add that during this process, it did, it came to our attention that we definitely need to clarify what information is provided to us as well, with specific details on the numbers and that they could be audited numbers as well. These are the things that we had discussed going through the evaluation process. So I was, after this process, going to bring back the, not only the policy, but the procedure as well.
Wonderful.
That's fine.
Okay.
That's
We can
perfect.
include that under 6.5 on tonight's agenda then and add that to the directive, okay? Other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that carries.
That's all we're asking.
Did we get Councillor King in? Thank you. Welcome back, Councillor King.
Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Ribbiak, seconded by Mayor Augustine, that the issue statement for agenda item 5.2, work step procedure, building and bylaw enforcement services be received, and that the recommendation contained therein be approved as follows. That the Policy and Priorities Committee directs staff to update the enforcement services protocols and present to a future meeting of the Policy and Priorities Committee for review. Questions or comments? I think that one's pretty well straightforward. Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I was actually surprised that this was on the agenda. I thought staff were going to, given what we had done a couple weeks ago, we're actually going to come forward with this, and this is sort of an extra little step that's in here. Yeah, it's clear that an update of the enforcement services protocols is needed. I think we had that discussion around this table a month ago, and as I said, I was interested in seeing that. That's what I thought I would see when I opened my package. So I'm just wondering, we heard a presentation earlier this evening from Mr. Torzis about specific suggestions. He makes a fair case, Mr. Chair, and I just wonder if some of those items can be worked in and looked at. So to remind members of committee what he spoke about, he talked about the definition for derelict vehicles. So that might be a different issue that's specific within a bylaw. But he did speak about different rules for rural and urban, treating complainants that they're fairly treated. So maybe a complaint in some situations more than one complaint. That the cost or a fee for looking at the complaints, and then also the timeline that complainants have, or that folks have to deal with the complaints, and then also the idea that a complaint needs to be written and not a phone call. I think a lot of those make sense, especially the idea. I know that a number of municipalities have looked at this. The town of Lincoln, for instance, I looked at what they were doing. They require a written complaint before anything is acted upon, as opposed to a phone call. I think that makes a pile of sense. And then in terms of another issue that we spoke about, priorities of and I think this work plan does talk about it, there's A, B, C's, and D's for complaints. So council may want to say, you know what, if it's an A and you get one complaint, go act on it because it's dealing with life and limb. But if it's a B, a C, or a D, well, maybe for a B you need 2 complaints, a C, 3, etc. So I guess, Mr. Chair, I'm looking for, since this is here, some more clarities. Can we give direction for some of those items now? And also, what is it to anticipate that staff will be coming back with?
All of your recap there was brought forward in the regular council meeting, and I'm sure the clerk has that all now, and we can give that all to, back to staff to do their job and come up with something. Mr. CAO?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, to address the mayor's comments, the mayor's absolutely right. That is exactly the work that is being undertaken currently. We have been slowed down by vacations and other priority projects. And I know that the fire chief and I have had many discussions about the protocols that you're looking at, and those issues are certainly first and foremost and are being formulated. I guess quite simply put, we just need a bit more time, and we'll have something to you first thing in the new year with regards to the very specifics that you're looking at receiving.
Okay, I'm pleased to hear that. I think this is an issue that has been talked about for a long time. This past year, I'd like to get it dealt with and figured out and move on to other things in the municipality. So what I heard the CEO say, they'll be coming forward in January. I look forward to that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It's always better to do it right than to do it over. Councilor Riviere?
Thank you. I guess when I saw the material that was provided, I was of the opinion that perhaps staff was looking for a critique from us as to where the old procedure might have been lacking or needed beefing up. But I'm gathering from this discussion that actually they may have a grasp of that and can come back with something else. So I just wonder whether we could clarify with staff, is there something that they were looking for today from us with regard to the procedures that currently exist? That's what was provided to us as reading material. And whether they need to hear more from us with regard to the areas that we think might need changing.
Some of the feedback or pushback from the public to staff, I think, is what's precipitating a lot of this. So I'm sure they're fully aware of some of the issues that require the attention. But I'll ask the CAO: is there further to Councilor Ribiak's comments? Is there something further you would like to hear from members of council?
No, Mr. Chairman. I think we've had all the input we require from members of council and are crystal clear on the task at hand, and we'll be coming back with some fantastic protocol recommendations.
I have full confidence that good stuff will come forward. Councilor Ribiak.
Thank you. And may I ask that we perhaps have a bit more lead time between the receipt of the written policy or protocols and the time that we discuss it. This is an important issue, and I would hate to think that we're left with a weekend or less of reading time in order to prepare for that discussion. I think it's going to be a good discussion. I'd like a little bit more time to digest it when it's finally available.
Mr. CAO, is there some consideration for that as far as timing is concerned? Write it slow because we can't read fast.
I'll increase the font size, Mr. Chairman, and double space it.
I like large print, please.
Chief, did you have a comment to make?
I just want a question, and you make a valid point. I talked to the CEO a number of times on this, and then one of the recommendations, I think we've both been working on this, and as far as the risk assessment and the speed of things, how we're going to do it, and how we're going to address things, and we're going to try to eliminate the malicious things and the things that are time-consuming and unproductive. My recommendation is rather than me put this together and then throw it to you on a Thursday or Friday and then give it to you on Monday to say yay or nay, possibility, and I don't know if we can do this, but is we draft this up and then maybe we get together as a whole in a meeting outside of this, and you can bring your points together and we can tweak it. Because I think that this has created so many issues within the town and created so much pain and suffering for so many different people, and there's so many misunderstandings that for me to sit down, or we to sit down and put this together in a draft and then have you look at it and approve it in a matter of a couple days, I think you're right. There's just so much that has happened that I would like a little bit more time and input from yourselves to get it right. As you said, John, we need to get it right, and a little bit more time, not just get it.
Okay, so the work that you folks will be doing, bringing forward, we can call a special meeting, Mr. Mayor, in order to discuss that specifically, because it certainly is a priority that we do get this right. So-
Absolutely, because you ultimately field all the problems and the questions, like initially, the complaints, and I think that your input will help us tweak it to the point where it's gonna work.
Suggestion well taken. So in fact, the thought that it's going to be brought forward to a future meeting, perhaps a special meeting before it comes back to P&P, will certainly clear up all the cloud that is in between us and the issue. So, okay. Is there further discussion?
Just, Mr. Chair, maybe it can be part of, I think we have a tentative date for the 14th of January to have a planning meeting. So it could be something that could be added, should there be a planning meeting, it could be added that evening.
Sure, the timing can be in there depending upon when this can come forward, and if in fact it is possible, make it at your earliest convenience? Does
Yes,
that work?
yeah, yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Other questions or comments? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Moved by Councillor Kersey, seconded by Councillor Ribbiak, that the issue sheet for agenda item 6.1 regarding Pelham Wi-Fi be received, and that the recommendation contained therein be approved as follows. That staff implement Wi-Fi at Peace Park by the end of the first quarter of 2013, and that a committee be established by town staff and the PBA members to monitor the Wi-Fi need within the town, and that the Wi-Fi committee update council on Pelham Wi-Fi progression as necessary. Questions or comments? Councilor Pat.
Mr. Chair, excellent, only request is, could you ask that a member of the Pelham Chamber be included as well? Because some of the members of the Business Association have dual memberships, that's all I would ask. It doesn't have to be a member, it could be, it doesn't have to be, I don't think a resolution, but I'll leave that up to staff direction, if that's appropriate.
Okay, we won't have to add that as an amendment, and,
Point taken,
Point
Mr.
taken.
Chairman, we'll certainly include the chamber.
okay, other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Councilor Clark.
Thank you, Councillor Gurley. Just the way the recommendation is worded, just seems, the last three sentences where it says that staff implement Wi-Fi at Peace Park by the end of the first quarter of 2013, and then it goes on to say that establish a committee and then to update us on the progress. We still don't know what exact technology is involved. We still don't know what it costs, yet we're drawing a line in the sand before that we have to have it done by this time, unless I'm missing something.
I believe the reason it's going to be in Peace Park is because they can do it from the server here,
No, I realize that.
which will be at no cost, because we're already paying for this. Yeah. Am I correct, Madam Treasurer?
The cost to increase the signal out there will be about approximately $800. That's the upper limit. So that's the only cost right now. Any new additional costs as the progression of the committee goes forward would come forward to council. But the committee is really looking for sponsorships as part of the Wi-Fi and not additional costs for this. So there will be no additional costs.
Does it say that in the report?
Well, it says that the cost to provide a stronger signal into Peace Park is approximately $800. But this report, the recommendation is only to put it out to Peace Park. So we can't do anything past that.
It also does state perhaps sponsors could be in place, to help offset costs there, right under 0.8. If the town wants to look in the future, some members, and looking at possible sponsors. Councilor Clark?
No, I'm not, well, Can I get a second whack at it? I'll let someone else go and maybe the question will get answered.
Okay, Councillor Kersey, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to comment, I spoke to the chairman of the PBA this afternoon with respect to this and their commitment with respect to serving on the committee. He assured me that they have great interest in this. They'd like to see it be cost neutral. So, you know, if and when we expand the service into the cores, that there would be a buy-in from the businesses who would benefit from it. And that through sale of sponsorships, whether they're in the downtown core or not. For example, the chair owns an insurance business that is unassociated with any of the downtown cores, but he expressed an interest to have a banner ad or what have you that would pop up when someone logged into the service. So those are the types of things that are going through the minds of the members of the PBA, and I think we may be able to move it forward and advance it with their support and support of the businesses of the chamber. And I think that's an excellent way to approach it.
So that is paragraph 2 and 3, where information will flow. This is basically the trial balloon. Okay, and from there, we will build this great foundation. We will build a skyscraper.
Here you are.
Councillor Ribbiak.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm looking for some clarity, I guess, with respect to the purpose of this particular experiment. And you call it a foundation for a large building, and I'm hoping that it is, but I'm having trouble seeing that. What I'm reading in this proposal is that, in fact, this is an attempt to determine technically whether it will work and what it'll take to make it work, as opposed to a determination to see how much interest there is in it and how business are affected or how traffic is affected downtown. If Peace Park is given the benefit of Wi-Fi, do we determine that there's an interest in the town to have Wi-Fi more generally made because more people will congregate in Peace Park to use the Wi-Fi? Or is it really to determine the technical apparatus required to put it out there? I'd just like some clarity with respect to that.
Mr. CAO.
Mr. Chairman, to answer the councillor's question, staff has determined the technical requirements to roll this out. And when we looked at it, we realized that it would be in excess of $8,000 of capital, or $80,000 of capital rather, to make this downtown area of Pelham Wi-Fi wired, or however you want to say it. This issue, to be quite frank, was far more complex than we originally had thought, or the direction we had originally been given. The concept of free Wi-Fi downtown sounds great, but we realized it was easier said than done. First, from the technical and the cost point, it was a lot more than we had originally anticipated. Second of all, in consultation with local business and with the PBA and others, we quickly realized that there wasn't widespread support for taxpayer subsidized Wi-Fi services. And we also realized that we had no background data, if you will, for the business case to justify rolling out even the $800 because we have no idea what the uptake would be like. So in discussion with the PBA specifically and businesses, which they've been an excellent resource, we both agreed that the wisest, most prudent way to proceed with this project is to take a one step first, very minimal cost, low risk, provide the Wi-Fi service in Peace Park, and then we can monitor and collect data on how many people and when they're using it, and that'll be valuable business information. So to convince a business that they need to support Wi-Fi, they need to see a business case. So if they know on a Thursday night that 4,000 people are logging into our Wi-Fi service while they're watching a concert, that's a pretty powerful business statement for them to get on board and say, well, I may want to expand this to my business. I may want to expand this to other parts of downtown. And that's the type of partnerships that we would be seeking going forward. The other comment was from some businesses that if we plan to spend $80,000 of taxpayer dollars to provide Wi-Fi downtown, and I have no use for it, how is that fair? Or why are we subsidizing other businesses with taxpayer dollars so they have an advantage that I don't? So these are the types of questions that were raised that we don't have answers for. And the logic behind establishing the committee that hopefully we can work with our business partners just to answer those questions and find the most practical and prudent way to advance the project.
Councillor Ribbian?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure that I'm much clearer on this, and it's probably my fault rather than anyone else's. We're certainly not going to find out by the end of the first quarter how many people attending a concert in Peace Park will have logged in.
We're just implementing it by the first quarter.
So it's ready for.
Okay, now I'm starting to get the picture. It's installed by the end of the first quarter, and then we monitor it for a period of time, what, a year?
Mr.
time.
Chairman, I would suspect we'll monitor it until the late fall, when the majority of the outdoor time ends in the community, particularly weather and also activities and programming.
Okay, I can see that much more clearly. I told you it was probably my fault rather than anybody else's.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just I guess a question, comment based on what Councillor Kersey stated. Certainly it'd be important to get sponsorship for this, especially moving forward once a business case is made, but this is a partnership. So I think I just want to say that it would be understood that the town would certainly be a large part of that. And one of the reasons I think that we're doing this is to advance the interests of the town of Pelham, as well as to be a wonderful place to live, work, play, etc. So I just want to make sure that while there may be banner ads from specific businesses, we want to make sure that there'll be a banner ad from the town of Pelham indicating that this is a service that's provided from the town as well. I'm sure that's thought of, and just wanted to say that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Clark?
I guess, Councillor Durley, what I'm looking for is I think it's a good idea, in theory, and I'm not sure how it works selling ads and how that whole process of collecting money and all that, I don't even want to know about that. But right now, the way, when I'm reading the recommendation and the additional information, it seems to be going ahead of itself. We're already committing to doing it. Okay, you know, I've been told that it's approximately $800, but it doesn't say here that that's the upset limit. What if it's $900? What if it's $1,100? What if it's $1,400? How far do we go? I just feel that it's not set in the right order, that maybe a little more research should be done, come back with an exact price, because we know the exact size of the area that we have to cover. And I don't know, I'm done.
Good point. Is $800 exactly, Madam Treasurer?
Yes, we had the signal quoted. This is the price from the supplier for the cost of this.
$800
Yeah.
is the number.
That's the upset limit. It's about 7 something, so I rounded up for
Okay.
tax purposes.
Eight is a high estimate, so.
No, I'm good.
And in order to see if it works, you have to put it in place. Other questions or comments? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? Carries. Moved by Councillor Papp, seconded by Councillor Kersey, that the issue sheet for agenda item 6.2 regarding the Christmas closing policy be received, and that Policies and Priorities Committee recommend to Council that policy P301/37, closure of municipal offices during Christmas, New Year's, and policy P301/11, designated holidays, be approved, and that these policies be put into effect on January 1, 2013. Questions or comments? Councillor Papp.
The number of holidays that we've designated, how does this compare to other local municipalities?
Mr. CAO, or Madam Treasurer?
It's almost identical. I'm not too sure about the half day on the Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. I haven't checked that, but the other holidays are identical.
Okay.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Kersey?
I had a question with respect to the half-day Christmas and New Year's. If they fall on a weekend, do they get pushed forward in the same manner as the other stat holidays, or the other holidays that are designated in the policy?
Madam Treasurer?
No, they don't.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Mr. Mayor?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll ask the question, but I did check into it. The designated holidays that are listed here, they're the same as what we currently have. Is that correct? Can we ask that from?
Yes, it is.
So it is the same. So there's no change there, there's no additional.
Well, the thing
I
is,
was-
we're starting to comply with the employment standards and having the service available during the Christmas time instead of forcing people to take the vacation.
That's right. And so just to that, Mr. Chair, I just want to compliment staff. I think this policy is a bit better than what was first proposed to us. We did have that discussion a couple of meetings ago, that we will stay open, not this year, but next year, starting next year, and that there will be a manager or director on duty in the building that's open, et cetera. So I think it's a better policy, and appreciate the extra work that was put into it. Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Councillor Kirsty?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we need to provide clarity with respect to the half-day Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve when it falls on a Saturday, Sunday? Because the paragraph subsequent to outlining the Christmas policy says that if any of these holidays fall on Saturday or Sunday and it's not a scheduled day of work, it's pushed over, so I just wonder whether that needs to be
Just be
clarified.
wordsmiths as it comes to council and stating that if in fact the half-day falls on not a regular workday, that it shall not be moved forward, or words to that effect.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, to answer the councilor's question is a very good suggestion, and we can just tack on a few extra words at the end of section 4 that would read, with the exception of New Year's Eve and Christmas Eve, and we certainly add that language in prior to approval at council.
Does that work? Perfect. Okay. Other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Moved by Councillor Papp, seconded by Councillor Kersey, that the issue sheet for agenda item 6.3 regarding human resource draft policies be received, and that the Policy and Priorities Committee recommend to Council that the following policies be approved. A, draft P30101 hiring policy. B, draft P30102 employee orientation. Draft P3013 hours of work policy. D, draft P0307 vacation day reporting. E, draft P0308 progressive discipline. And F, draft P30109 termination of employment. Comments or questions? Councilor Ribia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know what it is that we're going to hope to do this evening with, what is that, 6 fairly weighty human resources policies. I have particular perspectives with regard to human resources policies because I had a career in it, and I have some philosophical perspectives, some of which I have shared with the CAO and our treasurer. But what we have in front of us are some specific policies, some specific directions, a great deal of procedure, I think, involved in it, a lot of detail. And I don't see us going through every one of those line by line and determining to our satisfaction that we've now got the absolute very best policies in these areas that we can possibly get. It seems to me that one of the things that we might be talking about is some overall philosophy with regard to how we would want employment issues to be handled. I take it we have a hiring policy. In reading this one, I don't see what changes are being proposed. I don't know whether this is a wholesale new one or whether it's the old one being put forward, same as all the others. But I'm sure we have one, and I'm sure it works, and I'm sure it conforms to the requirements of law. If there are specific things that are being changed to make the hiring policy now consistent with law, then I'd like to know what those are so we can deal with those specifically and approve those specifically. But it does seem to me that in every one of these, from our perspective, the policy would be clear. We want to, in hiring people, we want to hire them fairly and, we have a hiring policy that works. Employee orientation, we want to have our employees oriented and properly trained. I don't know that at our level we want to go much further with respect to a policy statement than that. I understand we need to look at these and approve them, but I don't know how we can discuss them with a lot of oomph. And then on top of that, the things I would like to discuss probably aren't on here. I mean, there isn't a compensation policy on here. That would be interesting to look at. There isn't a policy with regard to employee performance appraisal, which is one that I think we would be interested in seeing, and that's not on this list either. So I really don't know where this discussion is going to take us. To be fair to each item, we could be here for weeks. To deal with it in the next 15 minutes or so, I don't know that we're going to accomplish very much. I wonder whether we mightn't at some point decide that we're going to have a discussion around what philosophy do we, as a council, endorse for employee issues, employee relations generally, within which these policies can be formulated and made to reflect. I have that issue. I just don't know what we're going to be able to do
I
in 15
see
or
on
20
this,
minutes.
and it could address one of the issues that you're talking about, the draft policy 01, 02, 03, then it skips to 07, 08, and 09. So I'm assuming that 04, 05, and 06 have other issues, which very well may be some of the things that you brought forward, and I'll ask the treasurer if in fact there's any truth in what I surmised.
Yes, actually, through you, Councillor Durley. This is just a preface of all the policies that need to come forward with respect to HR. There's several others out there, performance management being one of them that are being worked on. We didn't want to bring too many to council at one time, but these ones in particular have legislative updates, or for instance in the hiring, there's new methodologies, using the website more. The previous policy didn't talk about using universities and colleges as a format for students and so forth. So we wanted to have these policies approved so that we could move our recruitment practice further along and progress that. So that's what these were essentially brought forward for updating legislation according to Employment Standards Act, Occupational Health and Safety, Ontario Disabilities Act, and so forth.
Councillor Riviere?
Thank you. I think in there is perhaps an illustration of the difficulty I have. For example, I would have a great deal of difficulty discussing intelligently a progressive discipline program without understanding the performance management system and the performance appraisal system that is in place. The two are intertwined to a considerable extent, and I would expect that both would be expressed as elements of an overall umbrella philosophy, and we would have some confidence that the two work together in order to provide us with the best possible workforce that any town could have. But to deal with these things on a piecemeal basis like this without an overarching understanding of where we're going, I think is going to lead to a longer, more difficult discussion than otherwise would, and could probably lead us into areas of inconsistency and difficulty down the road that might be hard to resolve.
So you suggesting we wait until the whole parcel is here before we get into any of this? Is that what I hear you saying?
No, Mr. Chair. I hope what you're hearing me say is that we probably ought to have a discussion about what our employment relations, our human resources philosophy is, within which policies can be formulated so that philosophy would come to. I don't think we'd have difficulty stating it, because as I look around the council chamber, I see very, very progressive, creative, positive people, and that's the kind of a philosophy we probably have. But until we've articulated what that is and come to an agreement with it, then the chances are pretty good that all the policies that are created within that umbrella may or may not be entirely reflective, may need to be reworked in order to satisfy some of those requirements, and some may be, of course, just fine. But it's hard for me to determine whether they're just fine if I don't understand the criteria by which I'm making a judgment. That criteria would, of course, come out of that overall umbrella. And that's the difficulty I have in reading through this thing. They're all good policies, in my view. They all work. A lot of them are fairly standard in many of their elements. And so individually, I guess, they meet some sort of requirement, but together they don't really paint for me a picture of where it is that we as council want us to go from an employee, a human resources or human relations perspective. And that's the difficulty that I have, maybe others don't, but I certainly wonder whether we are going to be able to deal with 6 now, 6 later, 6 down the road on a piecemeal basis without meeting ourselves going in the opposite direction from time to time because we haven't established an overall umbrella.
Mr. CAO, I'm sure you can address some of the issues that were brought forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding is the human resources policies that are before PNP tonight are there because they do not comply with legislation. It is important that the municipality become compliant. And if you want to go back and review those on a philosophical level later, that's your prerogative. However, this is simply an exercise in being compliant with the province, and we are not in compliance with these particular policies. Second point, 6.5 on your agenda addresses the very issue that I think everyone has, is how might we develop our policies? How might we come up with criteria to evaluate? And how might we talk about the philosophical approaches to policy development? That is of great interest to staff because that'll help us guide us for our work, but I'm sure it's also obviously an issue for council. So is there a process to say we will, for example, take on human resource policies as a chunk, but before that, let's establish the themes or the visions or the statements we want to sort of live up to in that review and establish that as a benchmark and then methodically proceed through those policies? Or is it a shotgun approach where you arbitrarily take certain policies for whatever reason and decide you're going to review those? So that's completely council's prerogative. But again, I want to stress that the policies before you specifically for HR are to bring us in compliance with legislation. And that's the key point. If council wants to go back and change some of those to add additional information or philosophies, that's certainly a prerogative as well.
Okay, so this is necessary to be in compliance, and,
Yes.
and that's the reason it's here before
That's
us.
correct.
Councillor Riviere.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that the policies need to be in compliance with law, and I think it would have been helpful if we had understood in reviewing each one of these policies individually that here are the areas in which we are deficient, these are the changes that we need to make, and I think that that's something we could have dealt with within the confines of this. But we have in front of us the entire policy. There is a statement that we may amend, or I got to find it here, change these things. I don't think if the issue before us is we need certain provisions to be placed in these or certain provisions changed in order to become compliant, let's identify those and pass those, because of course we need to be compliant. But if we are looking at these policies as a way of general review, it seems to me we're starting at the wrong end. We're looking at the individual policies rather than the whole thing. But if the idea is to make specific things compliant, I'd like to know what those deficiencies are and how they're being addressed, and I'd be more than happy to pass on those, and that'd be a much shorter and much easier discussion to have.
It's hands up here. Councillor Papp.
Yeah, notwithstanding, definitely there are some areas of that we have to be compliant with legislation, and I don't disagree. But there are some areas that I don't, well, I guess I can mention, have nothing to do with employment standards. The hiring of students, the dealing of compensation of how many weeks in pay. That has nothing to do with employment standards other than, but typically. So I'm not trying to throw a monkey wrench in this, just saying I tend to agree with Councillor Rybak. Those that require us to be in legislative compliance, I have no problem with. But there's several issues. And just as a small matter, and I normally don't, we have a human resource department. I read that somewhere in here and I'm going, I don't think we do. So maybe it's something there that I don't know about, but I think what we want to make sure is that we're dealing with, if we're in violation of legislation, let's deal with those things tonight. I'm trying to make it simple as possible. The rest of the stuff, we need to deal with it very carefully as a package, along with the performance management, the compensation, and all the rest. So I'm not trying to make it any more difficult, but there was areas in here I looked at that they had nothing to do with employment standards. It had more to do with conditions of employment that we as a corporation decide we would like to either change, alter, or amend. If I'm not mistaken, Mr. CEO, and help me there, I'll just use the example of student hiring. You know, like I just saw an ad the other day from the municipality. They were using a lottery system. So I thought we were something that we would be using that here, that would be something that as a policy, that's something, I'm just using that as an example. I'm not using that as that would be something we do. So those are just my own comments, and you've confirmed, both Mr. CEO and Madam Chair, there are other things that are pieces that are missing. But if you can help us and say, look, this is the stuff that we need to deal with immediately, I don't have a problem with that, obviously, because we can't be in violation of our own regulations and legislation. Thank you.
Councillor Kersey.
My comments will be very brief. I guess I took the opposite tack. I thought the HR issue was so large that to try and philosophize an entire HR policy in a meeting like this would be very difficult. So I looked at it as each one of these as being a segment of that overarching policy. So when you look at the hiring policy, for example, the policy that's put forward here is laying out what council's philosophy is with respect to hiring when it comes to discipline. The policy should represent the philosophy of council with respect to discipline within the HR framework. So I viewed it as you breaking down that large piece into small bite-sized pieces that would allow us to espouse our philosophy by looking at each section of the whole HR picture. I think to sit around and try and lay out an overarching policy would be a pretty vast undertaking. So by breaking it down into bite-sized pieces, then it just makes it easier to deal with. So maybe we don't need to deal with 4 or 5 issues tonight. If you're more comfortable dealing with one, we can go through one or two at it line by line. And does it espouse the philosophy that we want to put forward? Fine and dandy. If it doesn't, let's put forward the changes we want. Staff has put forward a template for us to discuss, not necessarily for us to rubber stamp. I think that's the whole point of this new committee, is that when a policy comes forward, we discuss it, we put our stamp on it, amend it the way we want it, and then move it forward to council. So I understand where you're going with that, your discussion, Councilor Ribiak, but I took the other tack in thinking of it as breaking it down into bite-sized pieces. And whether we can deal with all 4 of them at one time, or 5 of them, well, maybe not.
Mr. CAO.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm still dwelling on Mr. Councillor Papp's comments about some parts of these policies don't have anything to do with legislation. It's quite correct. I think the logic behind our bringing these forwards was we would bring a whole policy where only perhaps a component would be a legislative requirement, but we didn't want to go back and amend an old policy to make it compliant. HR just rewrote it to modernize it and to bring it up to standard and send it off to councillors. So, the other piece of this, I suppose, is I guess it's more of a question, Mr. Chairman, for council from behalf of staff. We have numerous visioning documents like the strategic plan and other things, and I guess I just get I just require some clarity on what councillors mean when they say we need a HR philosophy while staying in a governance realm as opposed to administrative realm. So I guess I would just need that to be considered. If the council's vision is to develop policy that adheres to our vision statement, then staff is very clear in understanding what that means. Vibrant, caring, and creative. If there's other vision statements of council, perhaps I'm unaware, and that should maybe be discussed and clarified as so council stays in governance, administration stays in administration.
Across the line. Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you know, I appreciate the CEO's comments, especially the last there. So my question is, let's take one of these policies, the hiring policy. How much of this policy is a policy, and how much of this is process? It seems to me, Mr. Chair, that the beginning part is the policy part. A lot of it is process. And that's the problem, I think, that Councillor Ribbiak, at least one of the things that I heard Councillor Ribbiak say in relation to the overarching. So it pulls, I'm you know, Mr. Chair, we've joked about it at previous meetings. I come out with my fine-tooth comb, and I can fine-tooth comb these things. But I think what I'm hearing my colleagues around the table say is that we don't want to do that. We want to get through these policies. We want to deal with the policy part of it, and we want staff to deal with the rest of it, because we have a lot of fish to fry. So there's pieces in here, like Councillor Papp spoke about students. You know, that can be dealt with a one line. We don't have to talk about all of these different lines.
You don't have to.
The issue on recruitment or direct reporting relationships, you know, internal posting, all of those are one lines, and I think that's what the philosophy, the larger philosophy is. Should we have internal postings or not? And then worry about how it's done, whether it's 5 days, 10 days, 12 days, who cares? At this level, staff can worry about that. I mean, those are important factors. That's the discussion, Mr. Chair, I think that this committee wants to have. So maybe it was a rhetorical question, but maybe it wasn't, Mr. Chair, with specific to this policy on hiring. It seems to me, and I don't know if the CEO wants to comment, it seems to me that a lot of this is a procedural thing as opposed to a policy element.
Would it be wise to perhaps take these very issues that are being brought up here today and go through how might we exercise in order to clarify and go through? Would you, Mr. CAO, what would you think of that? Would that help? Or what's stopping us?
Trying to come up with a snappy comeback. Mr. Chairman, I in response to the mayor's comments, I agree with the mayor. And me, of all people, like policy as policy and procedure as procedure. I think with HR, however, we get into the legal ramifications and where the lawyers sort of take over the HR stuff. And to be frank, it's a great deal of cover your butt, to be polite, strategy, so that you try and develop a policy that's, you know, very comprehensive and includes everything to, as Councillor Papp would say, immunize the municipality from chances in relations to human resources. When it comes to employees, you're most vulnerable as a corporation from challenges for hiring or wrongful dismissal or wrong procedure and discipline. That's why these tend to be a little bit more procedural in nature. But I tend to agree. I mean, the second part of that is, do we need a how might we on these? I think my fuzzy situation is how might we develop policy evaluation process is where you may want to start with that as council and run through that as how might we evaluate our policies and come up with some ideas there. That might be my suggestion as a first step. That's council's prerogative.
Wait for 6.5 then?
Well, council can do either. I mean, you can defer these back to us. We can go back at them again. You can do them one at a time. It's your prerogative. I'm just thinking the larger question that was posed, maybe you do your how might we during under 6.5, or address the question under 6.5 by using a how might we process. I'll leave it with council.
Okay. Councillor Papp, you have your hand up?
Sorry, apologize. I'm trying to help. Is there anything in here right now, without putting, well, I am putting you in the hot seat. Of the 6 that are listed here, what are the ones that what you see in staff's eye that we're in violation or we're not compliant with employment standards? Madam Treasurer, maybe you can answer that. That might.
These policies were brought forward as the priority policies because the current policies in place are not being followed because they don't meet requirements under legislation, or there's new methodologies for hiring, for instance. For example, the hiring policy, we have to make sure that we have a fair and equitable hiring practice. So that policy has to be a lot more detailed, because on a procedure, you can alter things. You can change your mind. Directors can kind of do things that they want to do because it's not written in policy. So these types of things, you're going to get a lot more in the hiring side of it on what exactly needs to happen. If it's a 10-day open, or if it's full, then that we have something to stand up to with respect to legal claims or whatever that we've followed, and everybody is here too because it's in a policy. So the current hiring policy, for instance, doesn't allow us to do telephone interviews. Everybody's doing them, so we need a policy in place to do those kind of interviews. If someone's coming in from out of town and they want to do an interview, we want to be able to provide that interview as a first interview and then bring them in for a second or whatever. It doesn't allow us to go to like colleges or universities and post into there for specific skills, the current policy. So these policies have been changed and adapted to current methodologies that are out there in the field using other sites, other websites, as opposed to just our own Town of Pelham website for recruitment. And I mean, the progression of how recruitment is now being handled is much different than the policy that I think was written over 10, 15 years ago. So these are the ones that have, you'll note where we've put in specifically Employment Standard Acts regulations in some of them, like hours of work. There was issues with our hours of work under Employment Standards Act that needed to be corrected. So this specifically details those so that there's no issues with the employment standards, and we don't get any phone calls from them with respect to hours and breaks and those kind of things. So these ones were identified as priority to bring forward because the current ones no longer are valid because they are outdated and not in compliance.
A little bit inconsistent.
Questions or comments? Councillor Rabin.
Thank you. I think it would be useful for us to have a list of the specific areas where we are currently not in compliance with the law, and we can deal with each of those individually and probably put ourselves into strict compliance pretty quickly. With respect to entire wholesale changes to policies, I think some greater discussion is going to be required. And I'll give you an example. This one is out of Levels of Progressive Discipline, and it talks about employee counseling. It says it is within the carefulness of the director to decide when to counsel an employee and when to implement formal discipline. Counseling is used in situations where the director feels that discussion, instruction, training will resolve the employee's performance or behavior. Counseling is used to help correct poor performance and not to punish individuals. It ensures that the employee knows what is expected in terms of performance and how it is to be used. I read that and I say, well, I guess we have progressive discipline and we have counseling. Counsel is not punitive. Progressive discipline clearly is. Therein lies a really interesting discussion that we probably need to have with regard to how it is that we would want performance management issues to be handled. It may be a short discussion because we may be all in total agreement. I suspect it'll be a little longer because this is an area where people are rarely in total agreement. This is not an issue of law, right? We're not non-compliant with the law if we have or don't have a counseling process, so I'm thinking that if we are not compliant with the law in specific ways, or if there are things that we want to do that currently aren't being provided for within the policies, like posting in universities, I think that's a pretty quick decision for us, line by line, if those are segregated away from the fullness of a policy like this. But to get into a policy that is going to talk about how life is going to be lived within employment terms in the corporation of the Town of Pelham, that's not the same discussion. It's a different discussion. It's harder and longer. My point.
Other questions or comments? Councillor King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess, first of all, my question is, who is the HR expert within the town? Because I don't think that all of us sitting around this table are the HR experts. So I have some concern with respect to living up to the expectations of the law. If we're looking at the policy statement, that's one thing. Because as the CAO has stated, we have a strategic plan. We have the idea there. We know what our staff policies in terms of human resources should be living up to. And I agree with the mayor that the processes or the procedures that are attached to those policies are a staff function. So that brings me back to who is the HR expert, because if the policy is being developed and the statement is being developed and we approve of the statement because it is in keeping with our strategic plan, then so be it. And let staff do their job to create or develop the processes to support that policy and the purpose of that policy. But in the long run, I think it is council's job to approve the policy. How you get that policy done is something that we can take a look at, but I think that we are putting so much time into spinning our wheels right now that we're not accomplishing anything. And we need some clarity. We can't take a human resources policy manual that will end up being yay thick and going through it at 9 o'clock at night and expect to accomplish 6 policies that will make any sense in the long run. I think my concern tonight is the policies that we have before us required some fine-tuning in order to be compliant with legislation. So what are those points of those policies that we need to pay attention to? Is it there, and can we fine-tune the policy itself or the procedures at a later date? But I think that we need to address what is the issue. And the CAO said 25 minutes ago that one of the points was that these policies were not compliant. So are they compliant right now? That's my question. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Yale?
Mr. Chairman, to answer the councillor's question, the human resources expert within the town is, in fact, our human resource specialist, Sarah Thompson. When we talk about human resource department, it's sort of a department of one. Our second experts are our legal counsel, who we consult quite regularly on these matters. So those are the 2 resources that we rely on. The third one is, I guess I like to call research or R&D, research and duplicate. So we find best practices and look and see what's happening elsewhere. Maybe just to help aid this discussion, what I might recommend to council is that you defer these back to us. And what we can do is sort of show you the existing policy and then put some comments in so you can see where the changes are required to be compliant. That may answer the initial questions of this particular set, provide some clarity. We can bring those back. And then I would secondly recommend that maybe you set aside some time to specifically go through how might we process on how you're going to deal with policies or how you're going to evaluate policies. I think that's an excellent suggestion. I think that might have come from the mayor or the chairman. I'm not sure.
Okay. Would that be a reasonable resolution to our debate that we're currently going through? So we can defer this back and ask for a table. Sorry, Councilor Clark?
No, that's what I'm saying. Let's make the motion to do this.
Okay.
Somebody step
So what I'm hearing is we're deferred back to staff to bring back for the next PMP meeting so that a table can be made up of where we're not compliant and how we can be compliant in comparison table, and that will be of greater value to our discussion as it comes forward. Okay. Somebody want to make that motion? Councilor Clark?
Yep, and my background is not HR, and I would prefer to do it in small bites. To reel off 6 policies at 9 o'clock at night, I think is, there's no real hurry. I think if we prioritize the ones that we're not compliant with deal with them first and then carry on from there. Maybe do 2 a night. It's just, these are very complicated, I find anyhow. So to have it worded in that manner, that we deal with our ones that we're not compliant with, and we deal with them 2 at a time.
Okay, I will take that as a comment at first, and now I'm looking for a, Councillor Papp?
Seconder.
Okay, you moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Papp.
You're in committee, you don't need a second.
Don't need a second.
Okay, don't need a second. Okay, everybody's heard the motion to
still need
defer
you.
with direction to bring back for next PMP meeting. Okay, all in favor?
Apparently.
Opposed, if any? That carries. Thanks. Sorry, deferred. Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Kersey, that the issue sheet for agenda item 6.4 regarding the construction claim policy review be received, and that staff be directed to amend the construction damage claim policy to direct all claims for damages to the town's insurer for processing. Questions or comments? Councillor Kersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have a discussion with our agent for the insurer today and asked him to comment with respect to the fees charged for filing a claim. And he actually contacted the adjuster that he works for, and that in fact works for our town, and that agency represents many of the towns in Niagara. We are the only town that charges a fee for processing a claim for an insurance claim that's being put forward. His feeling was, and the adjuster's feelings were, that was an unnecessary thing to have within the policy. So I put that forward only for staff information that to be considered when they review the policy and bring the new amended policy back forward to us.
Other questions or comments? Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Although, I'm not sure that the member of council should have called our insurer. I do appreciate the information. And I did have questions about the deposit and all of that. My understanding, the comments by Councillor Kersey regarding this policy coming back, I thought it's before us now. Is that, so we're just giving this direction? Is that what?
That's the old.
Well,
policy.
I'd like to give the direction that we remove that, remove that deposit piece. If nobody else is doing it, if it's not a best practice, why are we doing it? So that's kind of the, I'll make that motion if you.
Well, by amending the construction damage and claim policy, actually what we're doing is asking staff to make sure that we are doing best practices. So I think that may be one area that they will look at, and in fact, if we are not compliant with best practices, that will be one of the suggestions that comes through.
The old policy. I read it.
So, Mr. Chair, that's being looked at.
I believe that should be part and parcel of,
All right.
or at least a part of the presentation and the next issue sheet.
It wasn't clear to me that would be dealt with, so I appreciate that. Also, I think an item that needs to be cleared up, before some of the construction claims were going, I guess this would be cleared up because the fee was going to, I don't know where the fee was going, we were holding it, and so that whole piece, but if we can get rid of the fee, that would help. Another question, what if a project doesn't use a video? This construction claims policy, I think, was written for some of the larger projects like a Hay Street reconstruction or something like that, where video work is undertaken. There's a number of projects that are done in the municipality, I would imagine, where we don't do the video inspection, or somebody drives and they hit a pothole, and do they have to pay the, all of that. So I'm hoping all of that can be clarified as we move forward. So I'm getting, I guess, Mr. Chair, the assurance from you that is part of the process moving forward. Can we just get the
To
CO
the CAO, you're hearing this, this discussion, and it certainly will be part of your deliberation before bringing back the next issue sheet.
That's correct. I mean, the motion, Mr. Chairman, is simply to direct staff to look at the changes required to the policy. So those are areas that certainly we'll look at.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Seeing none, I call a question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. Moved by Councillor Papp, seconded by Councillor Kersey, that the issue sheet for agenda item 6.5 regarding the development of a policy evaluation process be received, and that the Policy and Priorities Committee direct staff to begin the policy manual review on a section-by-section basis, beginning with council policies at the January 21st, 2013 meeting of Policy and Priorities. Questions or comments? Mr. CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I might recommend to council some previous comments that I made. Instead of considering this resolution, that council consider instead a special meeting where they run through how might we process of determining exactly how might they determine to evaluate policy. I think that may be a more focused and productive start to the discussion as opposed to trying to.
Thoughts on that suggestion? Pat?
Couldn't agree more.
Couldn't agree more. You want to make that in a form of motion? Seconder for that?
Need a seconder.
Don't need a seconder. You're right.
Don't need a second. I beat you to the punch.
Madam Clerk, did you capture all that? Yes, you did. Okay, so it's a matter of, we will convene a special meeting
I
to
think so.
look at how might we in order to deal with this very, very broad subject. Questions or comments? Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That carries. And that's the end of the agenda for P&P. Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Kersey, that this regular meeting of the Policy and Priorities be adjourned until the next meeting, being the Committee of the Whole, scheduled for Monday, January 7, 2013, unless sooner called by the Mayor. Before I call this question, I will like to, on behalf of Council, once again, echo the Mayor's words earlier this evening. Best wishes for a very Merry Christmas and a happy, healthy, and safe New Year for everyone in our town. Now I'll call the question. All those in favor of adjournment? Opposed, if any? That carries.
Projectors going to
Thank you, Nancy.
Because how many policies